The title of this podcast is Meet the Human Being Before You Get to the Matter at Hand. This is something that I have really learned to practice over the last, I guess, 10 years, is to really make an effort to connect with the humanity in others before doing whatever the purpose of being with them is. And I think that it's easy to do in situations in which you are not under a timeline, you don't have a timeline or a due date that you're working on something, or you're not trying to get somewhere. It's pretty easy to just have nothing to do and be on the beach in Hawaii or have a lazy weekend and to use that time to really get to know people. But what about when life is showing up in which there are deadlines present, there are due dates that you're trying to meet? What happens in those situations when life is throwing you a bit of a challenge, whether it's in the form of a health situation or in the form of some kind of financial hardship? And you're making a phone call to the bank or to lenders or whatever the case may be. Are you able to meet the human being who's on the other end of that interaction? And one of the things that I have made it a point to do is do exactly that, to silence my mind, to tell it to stand down, to say, hey, thank you for the comments, but they're not helpful here, and I'll take it from here. And one of the ways that I do that at work is I make it a point to begin every single email with a greeting and a greeting about how they're doing. And if there's something that I learned during our last interaction or past interactions about them or their loved ones or what they're up to, I recall that in the email. I do the same thing in conversations. I'm always asking people, how are you doing? How's your family? I want to connect with a human being before I move further, because that allows me to find that sweet spot in which I can just appreciate them, not about what they can do for me or what they did to me, be bothered by those things, but instead to really experience this kind of bliss, this joy that is present in almost every interaction. And that has served me really, really well. And there are a couple of examples. I mean, last week I was having something happen with one of my banking accounts in which there was an unauthorized purchase on it. And so I needed to call to cancel the card and to really find out what these charges were about. And the person who I got on the phone was someone who I assumed that their native language wasn't English. And so it was a bit hard to kind of understand them. And they kept repeating themselves because I kept asking them to repeat themselves in a very kind and calm way. And I noticed this reaction inside of me that was prompting me to ask to speak to a manager, hoping that the manager would be someone who I would understand when they were talking to me. But I resisted that urge. I was going to stay with the conversation. Perhaps this person, someone asks, every time someone calls in, they're always asking for the manager, and that's affecting them or their well-being. But regardless of what the reason was, the reason I didn't ask for the manager, even though I had somewhere to go and something to do, was because I would have been doing it at the prompting of my ego, of my prompting of not being able to handle that someone was trying to do a really good job on their end, that English wasn't their first language. And so stay with them, like be connected with a human being. We've all, or at least I have, done some difficult things where people have lost patience with me and or asked, for someone else to help. And I remember how I felt in those situations. So I didn't want to do that. One of those situations was in my past as a kid. I stuttered quite a bit. And that happened all the way until age 17. And I remember feeling the pressure and the shame of that. And my stepfather was not a safe place to provide the patience and the compassion with that. And I always remember feeling rushed, which made it worse. And so that's just one example of what I like to do in terms of being the human being before getting to the matter at hand. I try to do that in every situation. I encourage you to do the same thing too. A couple of areas that you might want to practice this with is with your loved ones. So if your kids in school and they're not doing well with their grades, before you get down to the business of implementing a plan to help them get back on track, meet the human being in the kid first. Connect with that first. And you can do that even when you're laying down new rules, new guidelines for the behavior that you know they're capable of moving forward as it applies to academics. And the same thing applies to conflict and other things that as human beings we find ourselves having to deal with is connect with a human being first. All times connect with a human being. And I found life to be much sweeter when I do that. When I don't allow myself to be bothered by what my mind has to say about the person or to tell or to dictate how I move through life, making everything that I am engaged in urgent and more important than what the other person might be dealing with. So work on this. Work on meeting the human being before you get to the matter at hand.